Hello, Alan here. Ohio State, harmonica. They're both going to be mentioned here in Aeoles, episode 7 of Ulysses. I owe a wee bit of an apology for being late here, but it's due to my Voxer friends on hashtag Ulysses 2020. Just when we think we're done with an episode, someone will mention, I think Noah brought up something about the parable of the plums at the end of here, and it takes us back. And Aeolus is a great episode. It's a busy episode. It takes place in the newspaper offices of the Freeman's Journal and the Evening Telegraph. They're both in the same building in central Dublin by Nelson's Pillar and by the General Post Office. Now, Nelson's Pillar is not there anymore. I'll put up a picture around here. It was bombed a couple times. And the General Post Office is still there. It's where the 1916 Easter uprising was held. The British came up the River Liffey, and Michael Collins and some other people took hold of the post office beforehand, and there's still bullet holes in the columns of the post office. They burned it down, but the facade remained, and they rebuilt it. So there's 16 characters in this episode, plus newsboys. It's the most characters in any episode, save Cersei, of the whole book. There's 58 headlines. You can see these headlines. Let me show you. Well, let me find a place where I don't have a bunch of annotations. Here, see those headlines? It's like imagine newsboys calling out, "How a great daily organ has turned out. We can see the canvasser at work." Now, Joyce added these later after he wrote the episode in, I think, 1918, and then added these around 1921. Let's see here. So, Bloom and Stephen had a near miss in the previous episode of Hades, you'll remember, where Bloom sees him at the same time that Stephen was walking towards Sandymount Strand. And this book is keeps detailed references of time. We know what time of day it is, but the first 3 episodes were all Stephen, so it started at 8 a.m. But then the 4 through 6 are Bloom, and 4 is Calypso, where he's eating with Molly, and it's 8 a.m. too. So these are taking place at the same time. That's how we can have characters like the man in the Mac, and there's going to be a blind beggar. I mentioned the cloud before. You can see things that progress through the novel, through time, through real fictional time. So we have Bloom he's trying to, well, first off, it starts in the heart of the Hibernian metropolis. Hibernia is just another ancient name for Ireland. Hiberno English, that means, English, Irish. So we're in the heart of the Dublin metropolis, and Bloom was coming from one direction and Stephen another, and their paths are going to cross yet again here in the newspaper room. They're going to cross yet again in an upcoming episode, and they're going to cross again. Will they ever meet? I don't know. I just don't know. So we have Bloom with this business of Alexander Keyes again, the grocerer that he's all hyped up about getting an ad for. Keyes. Alexander Keyes' last name is Keyes, but Bloom has an idea of, Keys crossing like that, and he was promised 3 months ad revenue from Alexander Keyes. So he's trying to get that, and he's in a telegraph office talking to a printer, and they cut out the ad, and Bloom's taking it all. No surprise, Bloom gets no respect in this chapter. People are bumping into him all the time, and he's, oh, excuse me, pardon me, excuse me, pardon me. He's running up and down. He's on the phone. Miles Crawford is the alcoholic editor in Aeoles, and he comes in. So I'll get to it. First, I want to talk about right around page 101. The headline, and it was the Feast of the Passover. We have all this typesetting things, like they print back Patrick Dignam backwards. That's around like 2:5, and that goes back to episode 5, or I mean 6, Hades. Bloom thinks about his dad. He thinks about Passover. In this episode, there's a lot of Old Testament Jewish things and New Testament, where I find a link between like Old Testament, the Father, New Testament, the Son, Father Bloom, Son Stephen, another correlation. Remember, they're both in mourning. Stephen's still over his mother. Simon, his father, appears in Aeolus. And you can see the progression of Simon through this novel. I think he appears like 20 times in here. His drunkenness becomes apparent through this novel, the progression of that. A lot of sounds and onomatopoeia, Joyce's right before. On 100, we have a funny wordplay on symmetry and cemetery. There's a couple palindromes in here. That's why I mentioned Patty Dignam's name. A palindrome is something you can spell forward and backward, like star comedy by Democrats. Not that no political thing meant, no pun intended there. Let's see. I mean, it's a lot to unpack. Here's it's almost impossible. We do our best. That's why it's so great to do this on Voxer too. However, I'm telling you guys some things I don't tell the Voxer people either. I let them find out here. So there's that. And one of the things is the Gold Cup race. Now we have this horse race that I've mentioned a few times in Lotus Eaters. You remember Bloom throws his little newspaper away, or he's about to throw it away, but he gives it to who's the character? Lyons, Bantam Lyons, who thinks that he's given him a racing tip. That's going to come up here. So that's another thing we follow throughout here, because Lenehan, a character who's in Dubliners, and Blazes Bolin end up betting on a horse named Spectre, and Spectre was the favorite, and he lost. The Gold Cup business starts on the bottom of page 105, and also note on the bottom of page 107, there's this business about the matches at line 461, 2, 3. Who has the most matches? And Lenehan does, of course, because every time somebody brings out a cigarette throughout Ulysses, you'll see Lenehan is ripe with the matches. And why does he always have matches? Because he never has a cigarette. Thank you, Parlez-vous, he says, or thank you, Omnibus. Miles Crawford is the editor, and he appears, I might have to add that, but he's the alcoholic editor, and he gives Bloom no respect. He's eating and yelling. Miles appears 42 times in Ulysses, a lot, so he'll be making his appearance throughout this. Stephen enters on page 109 with, at 5:30, "Good day, Sir Stephen," answered blushing. "The letter is not mine. Mr. Garrett Deasy asked me to." "Oh, I know him," Miles Crawford said, "and I knew his wife, too. The bloodiest old Tartar God ever made. By Jesus, she had the foot and mouth disease. And no mistake. The night she threw the soup in the waiter's face in the Star and Garter. Oh, ho!" Now, I told you that we'd be hearing about Deasy's wife and how she was an alcoholic and a drunk. Remember, was it last episode, or she sang that song about the geisha, little geisha girl? There's also on page 111, lines 608 through 10. "If Bloom were here," the professor said, "the gentle art of advertisement." "And Madame Bloom," Mr. O'Madden Burke added, "the vocal muse, Dublin's prom favorite." So they're talking about Molly here, and also literature, the press. There's also a line in here going back to early on at 678, "Nightmare from which you will never awake." On page 137, we have Bloom fighting against depression and Martha's letter. "Write it in the library. I must answer." He's still talking about Martha's letter, and the library scene is coming up. We also have A.E. Russell, George Russell in here. There's a passage where they're talking about Madame Blavatsky and Theosophy, and if I can find it. Well, here's something about it. Maybe before. Okay, bottom of 135, and there he is, too. Now, there's really a coincidence. Second time. Coming events cast their shadows before. With the approval of the eminent poet, Mr. George Russell, and A.E., what does that mean? Initials, perhaps. We have some business about that. Tentacles, octopus, something occult, symbolism, holding forth. George Russell, the Theosophical Society, McGregor Mathers, W.B. Yeats was involved. They were involved in the Golden Dawn with Lester Crowley. And Yeats's motto for the Golden Dawn was, "The devil is God inverted," in Latin. I wish I knew the Latin. But Stephen asked that, were they talking about me? Were they talking about me? Unfortunately, I can't find that, and I don't want to waste your time. See Noah's video, link below of Noah's videos, and Rouse hasn't made one yet, but she will. Spot the winner is the Gold Cup thing on page 105. Let's see. Okay, on 105 up here under memorable battles recalled, we have, "In Ohio," the editor shouted. "Ohio," the editor crowed in high treble from his uplifted scarlet face. "My Ohio." And they're talking about a North Cork militia, but I just like that they mention Ohio. At the beginning, lest I forget, in the beginning we have Haynes, right where on page 99. It's kind of important. This is a running, not joke, not gag, but Hines, you'll remember from episode 6, Hades, gets Bloom's name wrong. Well, we don't know that yet. It's coming. I know this is kind of hard to follow along. That's how Ulysses is. But at line 119, 3 bob I lent him in Meggers, 3 weeks. Third hint. Heinz owes Bloom money, and Heinz can't even barely remember Bloom's name. Yeah, like, what is your Christian name? And you'll see later he gets it wrong. So we have that. I digress. There's a lot of, like I said, movement. I should talk about briefly in Homer's Odyssey, the Aeoles episode. Odysseus is on the movable island. He's on the movable island, and Aeolus keeps him for a month, I think, or maybe more, maybe 3 months. Anyway, the important thing is he gives him a bag of wind to take with him, and then Odysseus is going back to Ithaca and all that, and they can see their way home, and the bag opens up accidentally and blows them all the way back. Now, that's what happens to Bloom. Bloom is all intent on getting this advertisement from Keys, but Miles just has no respect for him. Bloom is on the phone to Alexander Keys. He's calling back, trying to talk to Miles Crawford, the editor, and Crawford tells him to kiss his ass. And moreover, you kiss my royal Irish ass. Does not like Bloom for some reason. Maybe because he's Jewish. Here's a palindrome, a couple of them on 681, 2, 3. Madame, I'm Adam. And another one is, and Abel was I ere I saw Alba. A little Napoleon reference. Those are spelled the same forward as they are backward. Starting on page 111, you can do it. Okay, we're also having the editor and the newspaper men and a professor is in here. I need to talk about the rhetoric in here and the speeches. Before that, they're wanting Stephen to write for the paper, to be a journalist, and he doesn't want to do that. He's holding out to be this artist, you know, he wants to be an artist. Now, Stephen is here for one reason, and that's why, because in Nestor, episode 2, remember Mr. Deasy gave him that letter to the editor on hoof and mouth disease. So that's why Stephen's here. And that's why they almost cross Bloom and Stephen's paths. But, so there's that. But around, okay, I'll call it, okay, on page 112, maybe at 111, there's all this business about the murders in Phoenix Park. Here, I'll add something up here too. And they're looking at a map. That's what all this, B is Park Gate, good. This is a distant voice. His finger leaped and struck point after point, vibrating. T is Vice Regal Lodge. C is where the murder took place. And the murder was of old Madden Burke and this guy Fitzgerald. And an interesting thing, they mention Ignace Gallagher in here, and he's in a little cloud from Dubliners. Remember me saying that the end to Ulysses is not Portrait of the Artist, it's Dubliners. Many characters in Ulysses are from Dubliners. So in a little cloud, Ignace Gallagher is he's a poet, but in theory, in his mind, wannabe poet, but he's really a journalist, and he this is fiction. He lands this journalistic coup on the murders from the Invincibles, were the people that murdered these two guys. And it was in the late 1800s, and it's in Finnegan's Wake quite a bit too. Phoenix Park is a huge park in Dublin. It's where the president's house is, the president of Ireland. They have a big cross from when Pope John II spoke there to the multitudes. It is bigger than Central Park in New York City. So that's where all these P's and F's and F to P and the route Skin the Goat was a driver, like that. And we really didn't get into that in the Voxer group. But I just brought it up. I remembered, oh yeah, Roz, she likes maps. So I brought that up the other day. We have 3 rhetoric types of speeches in here from Aristotle, if I remember them correctly. One is auditory, one is forensic. The auditory is like the after dinner speech or for a commencement speech. The next is forensic. That's a lawyer to lawyer. And the third is, let's see, the third is deliberatory, for a lawyer swaying a judge. And on page 116, under the heading Impromptu, we have he began at the bottom. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, great was my admiration in listening. There's a recording of Joyce saying the speech, and I'll add the link below. It took Joyce a couple times to do it. I guess he was real nervous, all that newfangled, these new inventions like the phonograph and telephone. The telephone, by the way, was only 30 years old in 1904. So we get the speech, and it's talking about how the Egyptians scorn the Jews. So we have that, and it's kind of related to or comparing to Ireland versus England too, and how Ireland was kept down. It has a lot to do with Stephen's parable of the plums, which starts somewhere, not exactly at the end. It starts raising the wind at 121, where Stephen gets into the parable, and it goes on for a few pages, and the professor is overjoyed with it. Tickle the old ones too, Miles Crawford said. If the God Almighty's truth was known, and then they all go to the pub for a drink, which always made me wonder what happened to Buck Mulligan and Haynes in episode 1, Telemachus. Weren't they supposed to meet up with Stephen at noon at the pub at the ship? Wonder what they're doing about now. Probably being pretty thirsty, I assume. Joyce had to change a lot of words in here, just like starting with Dubliners. He constantly, his entire career, he was just being censored. In line 900, where are those blasted keys? Used to be bloody keys. He changed it. He wasn't willing to or there's a story about Dubliners about they wanted him to change bloody, but instead he added a bunch of other insults about the Queen instead, but I don't want to digress. Let me just try to explain or take my take on the parable of the plums. We have these two older women that want to make their way up Nelson's Pillar, and they're eating this stuff. They have a pig's foot with them, a kubring at the bottom of page 119, and a bottle of Double X, which is a bottle of Guinness. Their names are Ann Kearns and Florence McCabe. I guess Ann Kearns is owner of a pawn shop, so they're not too bad off. But this brawn, I guess, can be compared to Spam, and they have 4 slices of pan loaf, which kind of is like a head cheese, I guess they make, and a bunch of plums. They're compared to the Vestals, the Vestal Virgins. I'm not going to digress there because it was a 2-day conversation on Voxer. It's pretty interesting though. Nelson was a commander from England, Royal Navy, if I'm correct. Please correct me below in any comments, or if you want any further explication on these lines or anything I'm throwing out, feel free, I'll do my best. So they're going up Nelson's Pillar. Nelson's Pillar is a total phallic symbol. They're out of breath, they're egging each other on, come on. They get up there, they really don't like the view. Stephen, he calls it, no, Stephen said, I call it the Pishka site of Palestine, or the parable of the plums. Now, Pisgah was a mountain that God led Moses up to see the promised land. And they ultimately didn't get there, right? That's where I'm getting this Old Testament stuff from. And a parable is from the New Testament. So they get up to the top of Nelson's pillar and they eat the plums, 24 plums, I think, and they spit the seeds out. Now, Mark Nash, well, I'm not kidding. That's a sexual overtones there, right? They're spitting seeds out of their mouths with this phallic symbol. And there's a part where they cover their skirts up and that, but they're afraid the pillar will fall. Crawford asks, 2 old trickies, what? Trickies, prostitutes. It's all a convoluted mess, but it comes off as Stephen being very erudite. And it comes off as, Ireland losing home rule. I should say the Republic of Ireland losing home rule. And it comes off impressing all the newspaper guys. 970 interview with the editor. Bloom's calling back, and I said, he called back, and Miles Crawford says, tell him he can kiss my ass. He's now wanting only 2 months renewal for the ad. Remember, it used to be 3 months, but now he'll give a renewal for 2 months, he says, after he'll see. But he wants par, he wants attention in the Telegraph, too. Remember I said the newspaper offices are in the same building. So Bloom is just getting no respect again at the end of Aeoles. My camera is about to fall down, so I believe I'll end there as well. So thank you for your time. Please comment, like, subscribe. I'd appreciate it. Ta-ta.